In the past decades, there's been a sharp increase in weather-related disasters, and there's an urgent need to better prepare for the rising risks. Recent progress has greatly improved the forecasts that can help people know which disasters to prepare for and when these might occur. But these forecasts are not widely used. This may be because people don't understand forecasts or their required actions, people are afraid of acting in vain and preparing for disasters that don't happen, or money for risk management arrives too late, only once disasters have happened. Designed by the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Center, the Paying for Predictions game tackles this disconnect. During the game, players face changing climate risks. They have to make both individual and collective decisions to prepare for these risks, and must deal with the consequences of their decisions. Importantly, players will also experience how valuable forecasts can be in helping to inform their decisions. It's important to note two things before we go any further. First, the reality of disaster risk management is complex. Rather than trying to capture the entire complexity, this game offers a simplified representation of reality. It's designed to amplify the factors that can help people learn about resilience, while excluding other aspects of reality that would make the game too complicated. Second, even with its simplification of reality, it's still not unusual for players to find this game confusing initially. Just as in the real world, in this game the relationship between decisions and consequences can be complex. But the confusion should dissipate as gameplay evolves and people figure out the implications of the rules. To help them do this, you can play several practice rounds before you officially start the game, and go through the instructions slowly and methodically to give people a chance to understand things fully. To play the game, you'll need one highly skilled facilitator. The game is played in teams of 3, so you need a minimum of 6 players so you can have at least 2 teams. But the game can be played with up to 100 people. The players should ideally be disaster managers, volunteers, meteorological service authorities, donors, or anyone who works in the disaster risk management space. The game takes about 45 minutes to an hour to play. For each player, you'll need 10 large dry beans and 1 6-sided white dice. For each team, you'll need 1 6-sided colored dice, 1 8-sided dice, 2 red stones, 1 opaque cup, and 1 transparent cup. You'll also need a large enough room with enough tables and chairs for each player. Teams can share table space, as long as they can sit far enough apart to have separate conversations. Finally, you might also want to have prizes for the winning player and the winning team. And if you're working with particularly large groups, you might need audio-visual equipment so that everyone can hear and see the instructions clearly. As mentioned already, it's recommended to play a few practice rounds before you start the game officially. In your first practice round, explain the basic concept of the game. Each player represents a humanitarian aid worker responsible for managing a community. Group the players together in teams of 3, with each team representing a region. Give each player a 6-sided white dice. Explain that the dice will determine the amount of local rainfall. A dice roll of 1 means not very much local rain, while a dice roll of 6 means a lot of local rain. A dice roll in between means intermediate amounts of rain. Then give each team a 6-sided colored dice. Explain that the roll of this dice determines the amount of regional rainfall that will affect all communities. As before, a dice roll of 1 with this dice means low regional rainfall, and a dice roll of 6 means high rainfall. If the sum of the local and regional dice is 10 or more, like it is in this example for the person on the right, there will be so much rain that the affected local area will flood. When the dice concepts are understood, give each player 10 beans and explain that these beans represent the resources that they can use to prepare for local flooding. The resources are finite. During the game, players lose beans, but they cannot acquire any more, and they cannot share or give away beans. You'll explain how the beans are used during the first practice round. At this point, all the players need to know is that the person with the greatest number of beans remaining at the end of the game will be the individual winner. If a player runs out of beans, they face a humanitarian crisis in their community that they cannot respond to. They receive a red stone to represent this crisis, These players remain in their teams and continue rolling their individual dice. The group winner is the team with the fewest humanitarian crises at the end of the game. If there's a tie, then the team with the highest number of beans wins. Players join the game accepting these rules. There's no challenging of the rules during gameplay. With all the basic concepts explained, play the first practice round. For this round, the teams cannot know what the regional rainfall is at first, so ask each team to place their coloured dice, the one that represents regional rainfall, into an opaque cup, and to shake the cup and place it on the table upside down, without looking at what the dice roll is. Then ask each player to roll their own white dice, the one that represents local rainfall. Now ask the teams to reveal the value of the regional dice under the opaque cup, and to add this value to the value of their local dice. Remind them that if the sum of the two dice is 10 or more, then there's heavy rainfall and the affected local areas will flood. Ask if there are any floods in the room, and demonstrate what happens to those players. They must stand up, throw their hands in the air, and loudly exclaim, "Oh no!" They must also pay 4 beans to you to cover their disaster relief. Ask for examples of what flood relief could mean in their local reality, and explain why this relief is so expensive. For example, flooding might have destroyed roads, making it difficult and expensive to send tents to affected areas for emergency housing. For the second practice round, introduce the concept of preparedness. Explain how, at the start of each round, you'll give the players the option to pay 1 bean for flood preparations. Ask them what these preparations could look like in their reality. For example, you could prepare by making sure that tents for emergency housing are sent to their areas before the rainy season. If players are prepared and there is a flood, they will not have to pay 4 beans for disaster relief. Now start practice round 2. Ask all teams to roll their regional rainfall dice, making sure the dice is not visible under the cup. Explain that players must now decide if they want to invest 1 bean in flood preparedness. Give the players a short amount of time to consult with each other before they make their individual decisions. Those that plan to prepare must stand up. Those that don't, stay seated. End the consultation by counting down from 10 to 1. By the time you get to 1 and yell, "Stop!" decisions must be made. At that point, players must remain where they are, seated or standing. They remain this way until the round has been fully resolved. Collect 1 bean from each player who's standing. You can make or invite observations about these decisions. Then, as they did in the first practice round, players roll their local rainfall dice. Then each team reveals the regional rainfall using the dice that's hidden under the cup. Now you resolve the round. If a player is sitting and has a local flood, they must stand up and loudly say, "Oh no!" and then pay 4 beans for flood relief. If a player is standing and has a flood, they're a hero for having prepared for this disaster, and you can congratulate them. If a player is sitting and has no flood, nothing happens. If a player is standing and has no flood, they've effectively wasted the community's resources by acting in vain. But they pay nothing. Point out instances of worthy action and unnecessary action, and ask those players how they feel. If you feel it's needed, repeat this practice round once more, then give everyone their beans back. Ask if clarifications are needed. Before you start the game properly, there's one more important thing to explain. That's the forecast twist. Ask players if they would like to first see the result of the regional dice roll, the one usually hidden under the opaque cup, before they decide whether or not to prepare for floods. They should say yes. Tell them that you can offer half the team's access to an early warning system that will allow the regional dice to be visible from the beginning. Explain that in the real world, early warning systems are forecasts that scientists produce that can indicate higher chances of above or below average rainfall. In this game, you can offer an early warning system in the form of a transparent cup, which from that point until the end of the game will allow people to see the regional rain forecast before they make a decision about flood preparations. However, because it takes resources to learn how to understand and act on such forecasts, the teams that wish to access this early warning system will need to make an initial investment. Explain that in order to decide who gets this access, we use a bidding process. This will give each team the chance to debate the value of the early warning system and force them to quickly decide how much they'd be willing to pay for these early flood warnings. Ask each individual to contribute as many beans as they wish to their team's bid for the forecast. The teams with the highest bids will win access to the transparent cups. Give the teams a short amount of time to consult and collect their beans into a cup. Once again, end the consultation by counting down from 10 to 1. By the time you get to 1 and yell, "Stop!" a representative from each team must be standing with their cup of beans in their hand and no bids may be changed. Count each bid. Half of the teams, the ones that have bid the highest number of beans, gain access to the early warning system, and each of those teams receives a transparent cup that will allow them to see the regional dice roll early. However, you do not collect these beans. Instead, you charge each winning team 2 beans per player, which you explain is the real price of the forecast. Now you are ready to begin playing the game. Explain there will be 10 rounds of play. Follow this same sequence for each round. First, roll the regional rainfall dice. For teams with opaque cups, their dice remains hidden at first. Teams with the transparent cups can see their dice from the start. Second, allow 30 seconds for individuals and teams to decide whether to prepare for a flood or not. Those who want to prepare, stand up. Those who don't, stay seated. Count down the last 10 seconds, then yell, "Stop!" Collect the upfront payment of 1 bean from the standing players who opted to prepare for floods. Third, players roll their local rainfall dice. Then teams without the early warning systems, that is, the teams using the opaque cups, reveal their regional rainfall dice. Fourth, resolve the round. Each person tallies the total value of their local rainfall dice and the regional rainfall dice. Those with scores less than 10, or those with scores greater than 10 but that have paid for flood preparations, have no disaster. Those with a total score of 10 or more who have not prepared face flooding disasters. They must stand up and loudly exclaim, "Oh no!" and then pay 4 beans towards disaster relief. 5. Throughout the rounds, you can share remarks about observed behavior. Are some players unable to take early action because they've got so few beans left? How are people deciding whether or not to prepare for floods? After a few rounds, players should really have the hang of this game. So from round 7 onwards, you can introduce one final but important factor: climate change. Before you start round 7, ask the players if they've heard of climate change and get them to explain what they think it means. Allow time for a short discussion. Then explain that climate change means increased uncertainty in the future. And to represent this in the game, from now on, players will face a higher probability of flooding in their regions. To introduce this increased flood risk, replace all 6-sided regional dice with an 8-sided dice. By adding higher numbers onto the dice, the extra sides effectively increase the flood risk. Continue playing the game following the same rules as before. Players will now notice that with the 8-sided dice, the flood risk has increased. After the 10th round, the game is over. Count up the beans and celebrate the person with the most beans remaining as the individual winner. Then count up the red stones and celebrate the team with the fewest stones as the winning team. It's crucial to end off the game with a round of reflections, as this is where the real shared learning takes place. You can ask questions like these. What did you experience during the game? How does this experience link to your reality? What happened when we introduced climate change? Do you think this was an accurate representation of climate change? Share one insight you've gained from this game